Good morning, everybody. Good morning. This is Dr. Bachnight coming at you. And we are going to start getting into chapter 3 here of the unit. All right. First, though, I want to go over um, what's going on here. So we are in week 3, okay? And we're going to talk about evolution, biodiversity, and population ecology. So we're going to split this chapter into two different sections. I'll do a recording today, and then I'll do another one on Thursday for you, of course. And don't forget, you got your chapter review sheet, which is due on Sunday, okay, by midnight, and current event 2, which is due by Wednesday on midnight. So from now on, you're going to have one assignment due on Sunday and an assignment due on Wednesday by midnight. And remember, these assignments can be turned in late until, I think it's December 7th midnight, the night of finals there. Okay, they disappear. So don't be afraid to turn them in late for some credit. Okay. And then also you have week 4 that's available for you. So next week we'll be doing the ecology of communities. But just be aware, I put up week 5 for us as well. And we're actually skipping a couple chapters. We're going to go to chapter 14 to global climate change. And then we'll come back to chapter 5. And then you're actually not going to have a current event, though. You're going to listen to a podcast. We're going to change it up a little bit next week. But I'll talk about that next section. But just be aware we're not following around in the book. We're actually skipping next week, or week 5 to climate change. So if you want to work a little ahead, you can. I also have the chapter reviews. Oh, this is hidden from you guys. I also have the chapter reviews up here for you, and make them available, of course. Okay, and you'll be able to see them. And your current event 3. I think this is 3. Maybe it's 4. I might have it misnumbered. But you have one every week. Okay. Make that available for you too. Okay. So there you go. Nice and available for you guys to see. Okay. Let me make sure the other classes are done before I get out of here. Make sure I have made those available. Real quick. Oh, this was it. Okay. They're available. All right. So your things are available. So this week we're going to be talking about evolution, biodiversity, and population ecology. And last couple classes we talked about science and the basics of science and why we use it, and the scientific method. Then we talked about matter, and we can't create it or destroy it. Every time we use energy, we have a little bit less. The first and second law of thermodynamics. And how chemistry affects different things, and the wonderful way plants are able to use photosynthesis to get us energy, and all this wonderful basic science stuff, okay, about matter. And now we're going to start looking into how the ecology works together, right? And since we here as humans cannot really create or destroy anything, we never really produce anything. We just kind of rearrange the molecules, right? We are limited to what we have, okay? And everything is actually connected in the world, all right? So when we pull on one coat string, we get another, right? The butterfly effect. When the butterfly flaps his wings in Germany, we feel it all the way over here in Pittsburgh, okay? And we need to be careful because environmental science is the study of humanity, of the environment and humanity's role in the environment. And a lot of times we'll tug on one of those strings and not realize what's going on. And a really good example of it is the story of Yellowstone National Park. Okay, we long time ago we decided that we didn't want any wolves in. Some people decided, other people said, "Hey, we want them." But the farmers won out, and we eradicated the wolves from Yellowstone National Park. And everything was going okay. The farmers weren't losing anything, any of their sheep or anything like that. The predator was gone. But all of a sudden, a lot of things started happening in the ecosystem there that started changing, because the wolves are what's known as a keystone species. All right, they're number 1 on the predator chain. And they actually control a lot of things. They control where the herds go, and a lot of other things are connected to having a number 1 predator, the top predator on the food chain in that area. Okay, And this little video we'll watch here from Sustainable Man is actually now called Sustainable Human. All right, so if you're gonna do like them on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, they're good people. Okay, and they just do these little videos. Two brothers out there in San Francisco or something like that. All right, do these little videos. This shows you about how when we take out a keystone species such as the wolf, what could happen to the ecosystem. But the good news about this story is that we actually reintroduced the keystone species back into the ecosystem. And what a wonderful process, right? And, when we would talk about secession later on, think about that secession. When we took out the keystone species, the ecosystem started collapsing, and then we put it back, it slowly but surely built up to what we once knew before. And that's what secession is basically about when we talk about ecological secession. Okay, so let's watch this little video about the wolves in Yellowstone Park. Okay, and I always just put in how wolves change the rivers when I Google this for my classes, and that's all you need to do too.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone.
Now, I happen to think that a trophic cascade can happen on any level, right? We can take something out in the middle of the food chain and hurt things. And we'll talk about that at the end of the class too. But I thought I just mentioned that. But he is right. The technical term is you take something off the top of the food chain and it trickles on down. But I think it can happen anywhere. All right, we'll talk about that at the very end of the class.
Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. That the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion, the channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was a soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transform not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
It's just such an amazing story to me to see how we, the farmers and the ecological, the environmentalists got together and brought back that wolf, and how that changed the ecosystem back to what we used to see. All right, and the farmers were happy because it actually helped them out. It didn't mess up their fields as much. The flooding came back, and like you talked about machinery, picking up the fertilizer here and there. So everything's connected, right? And if we take out a keystone species, those trophic cascades can happen, and we see that over and over time. It's an experiment that we've done before, and we'll talk about a couple more of them as we go through these next couple chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 4. Okay, so let's get started into this presentation. Okay, so chapter 3, we're going to talk about evolution, biodiversity, and population ecology. Okay, so in this section, you're going to help you understand about natural selection. We'll talk about how evolution influenced both biodiversity, reasons for species extinction. Then we'll talk about the levels of ecological organization, population characteristics, logistic groups, limiting factors, and the challenges of current efforts for conserving biodiversity. All right. So today we're going to get down to probably the extinction part, and then save this for Thursday. The rest of this for Thursday. All right. So the case study for this book is Hawaii is geographically isolated in the middle of the Pacific and has created a cradle of evolution. So since Hawaii has been kind of constrained out there in the middle of the ocean and not too many animals can intermix, they kind of had their animals evolve in a certain way. Okay. Half of the native bird species, however, have gone extinct since the 18th century. And it's primarily due to human influences. Okay, the birds have lost their habitat. All right, that's one of the biggest things we'll learn about the causes of biodiversity loss. And habitat is the number one problem. Habitat loss is the number one problem out there. Okay, along with a couple other things too. So the akin is one of the 18 living species of Hawaiian honeycreepers that diverged from a single ancestral species. So it was one species to begin with. And slowly but surely there was a mutation in some of the birds, and say they had a better beak, all right? And that beak was a positive trait, and lo and behold, that started getting passed on to the next generations, and a whole voila, a new species actually arrived, all right? And each species has its own set of unique characteristics, like the shape of its bill, all right? And that gives them a competitive advantage in the environment to get a certain food. Maybe this beak's used to get out, I don't know what it's used for, maybe get out the bugs out of the bark a little bit easier. And then another beak will go into the tree to get the bugs out of a bark, right? Or one just on the bark, okay? And one goes into the wood like a woodpecker, okay? So as a species will start as one, but then a genetic defect will happen, which is it helps them out in the environment. Remember, the survival of the fittest isn't about being the strongest animal out there. It's about fitting in to the environment. All right, strength really is not. I mean, it's a good thing to have. All right, but it's not really the be all end all when it comes to surviving in the environment. It's being able to fit in and adapt. Okay. So the dakin is a distinctive curved bill that you use to get the nectar from similar shaped flowers. In Hawaiian forests under siege due to clear cutting and non-native species introduced first by the Polynesians and European settlers has helped took away the food sources, all right, and then brought in these non-native species into the environment, which added the extra competition for the akin bird. all right, putting even more pressure. So they lost their habitat, the trees for where they hide and eat, and then they also had extra competition in the field. Who actually these non-native species, many of them had no predators. Okay, and we'll talk about what's called an invasive species later on. Okay, that can hurt the native species. Okay, so evolution is a source of Earth's biodiversity. So a species is classified as a classification of organisms whose member can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So if you can get it on and have kids that can get it on, you are now a new species. And that just makes sense, right? Because population, you want to be able to, propagate your species. And if you can't do that, you ain't a species. So there are some animals out there that aren't species. Okay, an example of that would be the donkey, right? That is a hybrid between a horse and a mule, right? Because we have the horse here, and the horse was, has four legs, and the donkey has four legs. It kind of look the same, and the horse is nice and calm and easy to control, and we can have them do all these little things, all right? And then you have the donkey over here on the other side, or I guess it would be a mule, okay? On the other side, which is strong as heck, man. Pound for pound, it can outdo everything that the horse can do. But we call that, nickname for the mule is a jackass, okay? Because it's hard, it's ornery, it doesn't get along with us too well, it can't control it, all right? And so what we did is we said, hey, they got both four legs and they look about the same. Let's put them together, and voila, we got the donkey, all right? But unfortunately, the donkey is not a new species because it cannot interbreed or it can interbreed, but it cannot have live fertile offspring. Right? If it does have offspring, that offspring is going to be infertile and they can't pass on the gene. So it's not a new species. All right, and this doesn't happen too often. I'm sure in nature there might be some animals that do that, and hey, maybe a new species can arise from that. Okay, but as far as I'm concerned, we haven't really made any new species yet through humanity, except for maybe genetically modifying something. All right, so we have the species, which is live fertile offspring is the criteria for a species. Now we also got what's called a population. And a population is a group of individuals within the same species that live in a defined geographical area. So you've got to remember, a lot of times we're going to say defined geographical area. So when we talk carrying capacity, we have to have a defined geographical area. When we have ecological footprint, we have a defined ecological area where the stuff can grow. All right. And also for a population, we have to have a certain type of area. So the species, how many groundhogs are on Robert Morris campus, how many groundhogs are in Moon Township, how many groundhogs are in Pittsburgh. Okay, populations change over multiple generations as genetic changes alter their physical behavior and characteristics, and this is just called evolution. All right, so there'll be a mutation within inside the animal or the species that is better to help them adapt, and they evolve into, voila, a new species. And evolution originates in the genes that lead to the modifications of appearance or behavior. So it's inside your DNA. There's a mutation inside that DNA that causes that bill to change its look. All right. Evolution is driven by what's called natural selection, a process that favors certain inherent characteristics over others, causing them to be passed on more frequently. So the idea of natural selection is based on three basic observations. You can make these observations yourself. This is scientific theory. That means, you repeatedly see the same thing over and over and over again. Okay? Organisms face a constant struggle to survive and reproduce. All right? The survival of the fittest is a true thing. All right? Organizations tend to produce more offspring than can survive to maturity. So we're usually, if a species is going to be successful, they're always giving more kids than they really need, because a couple of them are going to die off. And you see this in nature a lot. Not all of Charlotte's sisters and brothers in Charlotte's Web's or offspring made it in Charlotte's Web, right? A lot of those spiders, this is called the K strategy, where they just overwhelm you with hundreds of spiders, but only about maybe one or two of those spiders actually make it, right? And we did this too when we were in the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, we had all this good health care and stuff like that, keeping our kids alive. Families would have 6 or 7 kids, but only one or two would actually make it to full maturity. Okay, but today we're smart. We have an intelligence. We're able to make child infant mortality rate, it's called, lower in a lot of these countries. And individuals of species vary in their attributes. So even in the species inside, they're going to be a little bit different genetical makeup. Humans, we've got different eye colors, right? And sometimes birds have a different feathers or something like that. Okay. So there are variations with inside the species as well that makes us each unique individuals and unique birds. Attributes are passed on from parent to offspring, of course, through the genes. And the genes that lead to better reproductive success will eventually evolve into the entire population. So the bill, when that gene that changed that bird's bill was better for them to get food, that became more successful, and they were able to reproduce more successfully. So the gene has to be able to fit into the environment and find a certain niche to take advantage of, and that drives the success of that species. The concept of natural selection came from Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Okay, and it's important to note that he always talked. Well, we think about the survival of the fittest when we're talking about Charles Darwin and everything like that. And I need to remind you that the survival of the fittest is talked about like 3 times during the Origin of Species he wrote. All right. But he also wrote about love and cooperation over 100 times. All right. So it's not necessarily always about surviving and having an ecological niche. The environments need to work together. Even the plants and the animals sometimes have these symbiotic relationships, which we'll talk about. All right. That help co-evolve together. It's like we kind of co-evolve the dog. Okay. So understanding evolution is vital for modern society. So we've got to know how we got here and how everything changes and how humans can actually affect this evolutionary process, right? Because we have what's called selective breeding of crops and livestock. So we have been causing genetic defects, all right, by breeding 2 things together, especially in the agricultural department. And as you know, I can't complain. We got some good food, right? So you can just imagine the corn that you're eating and the corn on the cob actually started as a little grass, right? They were smaller than those little corn cobs found on in the Chinese meals. Okay, so it's amazing how we have selectively bred these crops and livestock to fit our needs, right? Uh, when we talk about the evolutionary process, we need to avoid antibiotic resistance in our livestock. So we'll talk about this a little bit more during the agricultural section, but we're actually adding a lot of antibiotics to the food sources of the chickens and cows that we are eating so they don't get sick. And that makes sense. We don't want to ruin our income stream. We want to protect our investment in those chickens so we can make a little money as farmers at the end. Okay, but those animals aren't sick, and those antibiotics, they can get what's called resistant to these antibiotics, and then they don't work as well. Plus, some of those antibiotics actually get passed into us, and then when we need an antibiotic, it doesn't work as well. So we need to be mindful as a society about what too much antibiotics can do to a population. Okay, avoid pesticide resistance in crop eating insects. So another thing that's happened, we've had not only resistance to antibiotics, we have seen resistance to pesticides, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the agricultural section. But we got these things that we're called super weeds nowadays. Okay, and it's amazing. They are just strong as heck. We tried to destroy them, and now we can't pigweed. It's amazing. They got out there with the hammer, with the sickle again, and chop them all down. All right, pesticides are basically useless. And we'll talk about that in agriculture a little bit more. Determine how infectious disease spreads and gains or loses potency. So we need to follow how we can keep those animals healthy without using the antibiotics and the pesticides and all those other things. Okay, keeping them in a healthy ecosystem. Okay. So accidental changes in a DNA are called mutations. So what we do as humans, we try to do that purposely. We try to, cause that mutation. But it happens in the environment naturally all the time. And that's what gives rise to these genetic variations in individuals and animals and species around the world. And mixing the genetic material through sexual reproduction also generates variation, right? And that's a good thing. We want to have a lot of different genes within inside of each species to make the species a little bit stronger, right? And natural selection can drive a feature in a particular direction, right? So natural selection can drive something to, that bill is easier to get that food out, and that's what drives that species, that natural selection of that species to come about. Okay. So closely related species that live in different environments tend to diverge in their little traits, right? So different selection pressures leads to different adaptation, as certain individuals in a population will survive and reproduce at greater rates, right? So, you're going to have a defined area, and in each defined area, you can have all these different kinds of birds. You can have the generalist that goes after nectar and the seeds, all right? You're going to have the foragers that go around the birds and the bees and the bark pickers and the seed and fruit eaters and the nectarivores. All these are going to be found, but it depends on the biome and the different pressures within inside that ecosystem. Is there enough flowers for the nectarivores to actually live there? Okay, is there enough foliage and leaves for one of the leaf foragers to go there? So it's going to be, the different selective pressures in the ecosystem are going to lead to the different adaptations you see within inside the species. Unrelated species living in similar environments may independently acquire the similar traits. All right, this is called convergent evolution. So these birds are actually going for competition of the different foods. All right, these plants really aren't in competition with each other, but they just live in the same type of what's called a biome. There's the same temperature and precipitation. All right, and knowing that temperature and precipitation, we can predict what lives there. And these two cactuses, one is in the Canary Islands and one is in Arizona, are very similar looking, all right, but those seeds did not go all the way over through the Pacific Ocean to the Canary Islands. They just kind of convergent evolution means that they kind of evolved because that was the environment was the same. The biome was basically the same between both of them. Okay, and it's a similar selective pressures. All right, that makes them develop these same traits. Okay. Humans have conducted selective breeding on their own direction all the time. This is called artificial selection. Domesticating dogs, cats, and livestock is a perfect example of this. All right. So everything started with the wolves, and they say that the wolf. What happened was that they actually got something in their stomach that allowed them to eat our leftovers. Right. And then all of a sudden, that one animal, that one genetic defect in their stomach that allowed us to eat our leftovers, they started hanging around us in our dumps and stuff like that, and tracking us and eating our leftovers. And sooner or later, we became friends, and lo and behold, now we got the Collie, the Great Dane, the Saint Bernard, the Chihuahua, all right, all keeping us nice and safe and entertained, all right? And that's all due to us, okay? And that's neither good nor bad. Right? You're allowed to want to have a purebred dog, and each one is done for a different reason, right? I'm not too sure what the Chihuahua is doing for, but Saint Bernard, that's the one that helps you out of the snow. Okay, keeps you nice and warm. Collie, Lassie, all right. And then we got, you guys even know who Lassie is? I wonder if you guys do or not. That's why I miss not being in the class. Um, the ancestral wolf. Okay. Then we have the different plants, right? So all this was one little weed, right? Became the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the broccoli, and cauliflower we all know today. We all know and love and get that healthy food in us, right? So we've been doing this for years and years and years, and this is different than genetically modified organisms. We'll talk later in the agriculture department, but we've been doing this since the Bible times. Okay, they talk about in the Bible separating the black sheep from the white sheep, so they can have two different color wolves. Right, so this is nothing new, and we've been doing this for eons. All right, ever since we started the agricultural revolution. So biodiversity and biological diversity refers to the variety of life across all levels. So all the different species and the genes and the population and the community. So biological diversity is everything in one community. So if we look at live, living stuff, all right? So if we look at Robin Ward campus, the biological diversity would be all the grass, all the trees, all the groundhogs, all the rabbits, all the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, faculty, and staff. All right, all those different things will be the biological diversity, the living things in that given area. All right. So there is about 1.8 million species that have been identified, but there's actually about scientists say about 3 to 100 million that we really haven't identified or classified as species yet. And the process by which a new species is generated is called specification. Okay, that's how we determine which one comes, and we just watch it over time, and we can see repeatedly. We just go back in history, right? And it's hard to see new specification happening in front of your eyes. We don't know until it's actually happened because they have to have live fertile offspring for it to happen, right? But we can think about how specification can produce new types of organisms if we just, step back and use some of our critical thinking skills and say, hey, does this make sense? And what I'm hearing is true. We got what's called allopatric specification, which occurs when populations become physically separated from the geography. All right, and you can see this is a basic example. We got two little mayflies over here, and they're in a single population, and all of a sudden the Grand Canyon opens up. All right, and we got one, but the same species here is now divided, and over the eons, they pick up a certain trait to help them live in that ecosystem a little bit easier. All right, and they become a totally new species. All right. And this happens all the time. We have this happen in the Grand Canyon with the squirrels. There's one species of squirrels on one side and another species on the other side because they can't get across the Colorado River. But one of my favorite stories about speciation is the bats. Here in America, I get this nose fungus problem, right? And we notice that the bats in Europe are able to really protect themselves a little bit better from this nose fungus. So we thought, hey, bats and bats. Let's get them together and see if we can get them to, do the little thing, and we'll get a new species, and we'll pass on that trait of being able to help with the nose bat. But unfortunately, they were two different species. When we got them together to propagate, they could not produce live fertile offspring. But hey, that's what happens when the Atlantic Ocean is between you for 5 million years or whatever, right? The two species diverged or had allotropic separation, allopatric specification, and voila, we got two different species. Okay. Scientists represent the history of divergence from species in phylogenetic trees. All right, so we started with the lampreys, and we got the sharks, and the bony fish, the lungfish, all the way throughout the history, all the way up to the birds. All right, so we just go through the fossil records and see how these animals and species developed into other things. Okay, and we have the taxonomist groups, all right, where the species are categories meant to reflect evolutionary relationships. All right, so you have your species, your genus, your family, your order, your class, your phylum, your kingdom, and your domain. So the domain's the whole animal kingdom, right? Or the whole world, right? And then you have the animal kingdom with inside of it. Inside that animal kingdom, you have your fish or your elephants, okay? And then you have your class of birds, okay? And then you have your order of birds, family, genus, and the species. Fossils reveal the long history, so that's how we really see what has happened in the past. We go back and we look at the fossil record, and we just put it in chronological order, right? So a fossil is just an imprint of stone of a dead organism that dates back in rock layers millions of years, and the body of the fossil worldwide is called the fossil record. And there's a vast majority of species that once lived that have disappeared due to what's called extinction. Okay, and we've had a couple mass extinctions in the world already. Extinctions occur when the environment changes more rapidly than a species can adapt. So something happens with inside the environment that causes them to lose their ecological niche, or the population maybe wasn't big enough to bounce back after a catastrophe or something like that. So it's a small and narrow spot special. So small and narrowly specialized population are the most vulnerable, right? So the Hawaiian native birds and plants did not evolve defenses against the mammal predators that were actually brought to the island, and they were the most susceptible at that time. So most extinctions happen gradually, right? So it's a rate called the background extinction rate. In Earth, we've seen at least 5 mass extinction events that wiped out about 50 to 95% of the Earth's species each time we've had one of those mass extinction events. The most catastrophic was the Permian extinction about 250 million years ago, and that caused its causes included volcanoes, an asteroid impact, methane release, and global warming. So you remember the dinosaurs. The asteroid came back. Most people just think it was the asteroid that came back and hit the Yucatan Peninsula and put up all that stuff and changed the environment drastically. Put up all this ash up into the air and blocked off all the not all the light, but blocked off a lot of sunlight, and the plants weren't able to do their photosynthesis thing, right? And believe it or not, most of the dinosaurs were vegetarians, and they couldn't have anything to eat, and they were pretty big things. That brontosaurus was huge. It took a lot of plants to feed that thing. And if the plants ain't growing, they ain't gonna eat, right? So most of the time, when we see these mass extinction, it is a quick thing that happens, but it's due to a natural effect that happened in the environment, and they were not able to survive. Okay. Today's extinction rate, though, all right, as we look at it, all right, so we can count how many animals are going extinct, right? They say today's extinction rate is about 100 to 1,000 times higher than the background rate in rising, right? So we are actually, I haven't seen an asteroid hit the Earth. Did I miss it in the news or anything? I don't think it's happened. Right? I don't think we're having a whole bunch of volcanoes going off or anything like that, right? But we still see the extinction rate happening at the time of the 5 mass extinctions we had before. And this is very concerning to individuals. Biodiversity is very, very important. Biodiversity is the resilience we need if we're going to have sustainability. Okay? So the causes from this mass extinction rate stem from human population growth, all right? Because we are altering and destroying the natural habitat so we can be able to live in the habitat we want to, right? Also, overhunting and over harvesting has been a problem. So we'll talk about some of the fisheries that are collapsing around the world because we're just taking out too many cods so that we can have our fish fillets at McDonald's. Okay, we're just over harvesting. We take out too many. It's called carrying capacity. All right. Also, pollution in water and soil is also, or air, water, and soil is also killing off some of these things. And reduction of non-native species, invasive species, and climate change is happening. Okay. So ecology and organisms. Why don't we stop here? Let's go into this real quick. So, and then we'll get out of here. So I'll finish the rest of these slides next week. But I just want to end on we talked about the next mass extinction. All right. So if we look here, right now we have what's called the insect apocalypse that could be happening now. All right. This is hard to track because it's hard to track all these insects. But there's a group of scientists around the world that actually do this. All right. In Germany is a big citizens project where for years, like 20 years, the citizens will go out and they get these traps, all right, and they catch as many bugs as they can over a certain period of time, and then they weigh it. So we weigh our insects by body mass, all right. We don't go out and pick out each one. They might look at them later, but that's basically how we do it. We weigh how many insects we catch, and that's how we estimate the insect population. Okay. But they noticed something in Germany in the most recent years is that some of the places were not getting the same biomass, that the body mass that they were getting before. It has been a dramatic decrease in the amount of insects they're catching. And it's not all over Germany, just in some of these pockets. And they're trying to figure out why that's happening. Because, like I said, they got the trophic cascade that we talked about with the wolves. You take out the primary predator, and that starts a ripple effect down the whole ecological system. Okay, because they're not putting the pressure on the top predator's gone. All right, but what happens if we take out the middle part, the basic food for a lot of these animals? All right in the middle of that food chain. What's going to happen? Can we have a trophic cascade that can go up and down on both sides because that middle part of the food chain is actually gone? There's not enough food for everything. Who knows? And this is hard to track. So scientists are really on. This is more cutting edge. This is more. We need to follow this story. But the more data I've seen out in the sphere about the insects disappearing and not being there is relatively true, I believe. Anecdotally, I'm not getting as many bugs on my windshield as I was when I was your age. Okay, that's just a fact of life. I notice that all the time. Okay. But we're also seeing, like I said in that last one, the scientists are warning about we're approaching the next mass extinction. Okay. Of course, everybody wants the rhino and stuff to be nice and healthy and around for us, but it's a lot bigger than just the rhino. Right. This was the tearjerker. Okay. But there's also, the panda out there, but there was also the sea otter and we took out the pigeons, and we took out a lot of animals that are dying around. Then we'll talk a little bit more about uh, the Endangered Species Act later and how that's determined and stuff like that, right? But just be aware that not only do we have these forest fires out there and the hurricanes that are hitting Louisiana, we also have this mass extinction that's happening in the primates and in the insect world that is due to habitat loss, um, primarily, and then some other things like pollution and carbon and climate change and things like that. Okay. All right. So that is lecture 1 of PowerPoint 3, chapter 3. Okay. And we'll get back. We'll start talking about ecology and the organism. Okay. If you guys have any problems or questions, feel free to give me a shout out, and I will get to them. And also, I'm grading your paper slowly but surely. I'm getting to some of them. So I'll keep on, and I'm going to do a lot more today too. So look for your grades, your homeworks being graded soon. Okay. If you haven't seen a couple of them already. All right. We'll see you later, everybody. Bye bye.